Hello, everybody. My name is TRG. I'm this guy that plays games and talks about them. I was playing Elden Ring Nightreign, and this is recorded during the Libra Everdark boss time frame. So whenever this is uploaded, just know that this is around that time. But I was fighting it, and I got multiple good runs, some with legendary weapons, and even at level 15. Now I am doing solo runs, so this is a little bit different than normal game. But the thing is that sometimes solo runs are actually easier than multi runs or duos or trios. The problem that I'm having is that even when you have multiple people and even when you have just two people, everything just seems to be really unbalanced. And this is something I have felt for Elden Ring Nightreign for a very long time, but I wanted to make a video exploring this. So this is going to be broken up into three parts. The first part is going to be talking about the main three mechanics: the boss, the knight system, and the weapon system. The next one is going to be comparing it to a king of roguelikes, and then the conclusion will be how they can improve and what should they fundamentally change. Like if they need to rework the entire game or rework entire mechanics to make it more cohesive. So without further ado, let's get on to the video. So let's start off with the weapon system, as that is the easiest to explain what the problem is and the easiest to fix. So if you don't know, most roguelikes work off of pools, and Elden Ring Nightreign is no different. The problem is that its pool is gigantic, and every single thing is tied to a singular reward. I can't really think of any roguelike that does that, and if they do, they usually pair it with other stuff, so it's not just, this is what it is, you have to get lucky. This is kind of contradictory to its own design and just generally roguelikes design in general. Pools are not really supposed to be this vast with this amount of stuff, especially considering a lot of the stuff is kind of mediocre. And if you just get a normal good weapon from the uncommon pool, it's going to be on par with the epic and the legendary pool, especially considering that you can upgrade your weapon to epic. This, on top of the passes being part of the same exact pool, leads to situations in which I wasn't able to get any type of defense, and then Libra was able to hit me for half my health. Sometimes even more. So a roguelike that has a pool in which you can't really go and manipulate it or get powerful isn't really a roguelike. What it is just BS. There's not really any way to really describe it besides a bumbling mess of a mechanic. It's just there to say it's a roguelike. It's there to say, well, it was luck of the draw, randomness. But if you ever played other roguelikes, if you ever played any other game that had a level of randomness, usually there's other elements to make sure that you don't fall behind. Make sure that you can go and survive the other things, like balancing the attacks around your health, balancing the health of the enemies around your damage, balancing the movement of the enemy around your damage. Elden Ring Nightreign doesn't do any of that, and that leads to the pools being disappointing and the weapons being disappointing. And I'm gonna lump the characters in with the knight system because you picked that for your expeditions. And the fundamental misunderstanding with a roguelike and the character system, I think also extends over here, not just the night time system. Because I think that they're treating this as a Souls-like, which it shouldn't be. And then when they don't treat it like a Souls-like, they go a little bit too far, and then you're not upgraded enough to fight a lot of these bosses. So I'm just going to do a test real quick. We're going to look and see how much damage each of them can do. We have their base weapon. Then we have Vike's War Spear, because, Libra, at the time of recording this, is the Everdark boss. Then we have two colossal weapons, and then two great swords to, each get their own specialty. So we're just going to do 2 taps for each. We're not going to do a full combo, just to get the general DPS. No, it's around 375, so 400-ish. 2 tap with that. 396 makes sense. It is a epic weapon, so about 400. 553. And then let's go and get the Dragon Claw. 617. We are going to do one tap for this to go and check and see. So about 175, 174, 174, 190. Just about. So about 170 to 190. And then the Blasphemous Blade. So I know it has the Dark Moon stuff. So not exact, but we go over here. About 190 as well. And then with his ultimate, it is about 427. So then we have Wilder over here. About 113, 114 per hit. About 196-ish. You can round that to 200 if you wish. 273, around that. Around 300 as well, a little bit more since, you know, we do this, 175, 174, 174, we do this 2-hit, 190, 190, yeah, just about the same as Raider. And the same thing, 190 for that. And then 389. We can do that to 400. Check and see without. It is the same without. But here's the big one. This one has two different modes for his ultimate. You can either do this on you, which does just a little bit over Raiders. But the big one is this, which does 700. So he has Raider beat on this. And then just putting it into a little Google Doc to go and show the differences, you can see that the Pike is pretty much the same. The Colossals 1 and 2 are pretty much the same. The swords have a small deviation, but that's just one piece of damage. It could be due to weird hitbox things. The only one that was different was their standard weapon, but that makes sense as he starts with the Colossal and Wilder starts with, you know, just a normal sword. But there's a problem with Raider that we're going to get into now. And I think that you would be able to make the case that it could come down to preference, if not for the fact that their ultimates do drastically different damages with kind of similar startups that you can both whiff. But also, Raider has a bad weapon moveset for him. So all I did here was trying to line up the starting animations as close as I can to go and check and see if one was faster than the other. Raider just seems to have a follow-up. But if you notice over here, he has more horizontal attacks rather than vertical. And when he does vertical, it's actually quite off-centered. Meaning that if you're facing against a normal body, like in Libra's case, you're going to get misses quite a bit. This means the rewards mean pretty much nothing for Guardian, Raider, Wilder, even Executor. It just means that these classifications are pretty much redundant. Post-edit note here, Raider has greater N-like for all of his moves, meaning that if he wants to roll, well, you're kind of screwed. This means technically Wilder succeeds more because of the basic Elden Ring moveset, especially with Raider's ending combo in which he has to do 2 hits. It is such a detriment to him. So why have a pool of weapons in which it doesn't matter what character archetype you pick when your moveset with your specific weapon kind of sucks and leads to a lot of misses? And I should know, I'm a main of that guy. And yet, even the DPS market, it doesn't really matter either. Matter of fact, you're going to get beaten out by Wilder with his ultimate. So when the knight system says, "Oh, hey, you're at the luck of the draw of like what your class is," the real answer is kind of not. You know, Wilder is supposed to be the sword guy, just a normal great swords type of stuff and everything in between. He can fill the role of raider quite well. His stats are very similar. Guardian basically is supposed to be the other version of tank with shields. He can fill the role of raider. Raider can fill the role of Wilder, though he sucks at it a little bit more because of the ultimate. He can fill the role of Guardian. There's too much overlap when it comes to stuff like this, and I think that there needs to be a separation. Otherwise, it's redundancy and it's more of ooh and ah. Which brings me to my next point, the bosses. He has stuff like Gladius, at least in his first phase, in which he's actually a pretty nice boss in his first phase. And his hits are a little bit tighter than what you might think, but you just need to be a little bit more aggressive and get over that fear, something that we see later on. And you can see that the damage isn't too bad either. The problem comes in his second phase. He decides to mitosis in his second phase, and he has 3 now, which if you know anything about Souls-likes, you never want to do that. Even with the mechanics and everything, you're not fast enough and you don't have the moveset to deal with stuff like this. Another thing to mention is that because it is a Souls-like, you do want to lock on. The problem is that they will go and try to approach you from all sides, including behind and outside of your field of vision on your sides. That, coupled with the fact that he can just breathe fire very quickly and hit you for a large amount of damage, leads to this fight in its second phase taking a dip in quality. Adele, the second boss chronologically, is actually a little bit of a conundrum. I can't express my feelings about him quite that much. He does have some weird stuff with his grab, in which you do want to be aggressive with him, but then he punishes for aggressiveness. But the first phase is overall really well balanced, and that's something that we see constantly throughout. First phase is okay or well balanced. Second phase takes another dip. We can see this dip in quality when he transforms in his second phase, and your option is supposed to be running out of the area. But if you did anything, even with a single attack, well, you're screwed. You will take massive amounts of damage. But let's see when they do a boss good. That being Fulgur. Now, Fulgur is very much close to like Dark Souls 3 style of bosses. It will go and try to punish you for being stupidly aggressive, and I'm not super trying here. I just want to get him and show like his moves. But you can see that they're relatively easy to dodge, but they're punishing if you don't do it right. And you can punish him like that for massive amounts of damage to help you out in case you suck. And this style of combat continues over to his second phase, in which he gets a very large flashy attack, but that attack hits for kind of similar amounts, in which from my testing is around half health. And you can jump over it. This also extends to his Everdark variant, in which he gets a super nuke arrow, and he gives you enough time with the telegraph to recuperate some amount of stamina so you can start running. This problem with quality also extends to Everdarks, but also field bosses, greater foes, Everjails, all that. I don't know about you, but if I fight a Deathrite bird and it does just as much damage as Everdark Libra, I'm going to start questioning the balance of the game. Oh, and speaking of that rat bastard, let's go talk about his Everdark variant, because it is one of the most infuriating boss designs, as I don't know how you think of this, because none of it works. So Libra is a very chaotic fight in his base form. You can see he jumps, he goes and does stuff and makes giant madness geysers, in which they're kind of hard to time, and if you do whiff an attack or even land an attack, you can get punished for that. But overall, it's not like too chaotic. If you had a good build, you can definitely do this quite easily. And he also leaves stuff that heals your madness as well. And there's no second phase with him either. This is what you get. There is stuff with him upgrading his turret and stuff like that, but he doesn't really do much outside of this. You want to know what the Everdark did? So the fight starts off like a normal Libra fight, and that's whatever, right? I think that that's a fair design, as all of them kind of start off like that, besides the gaping jaw, but he has this thing in which he can summon a adversary. The problem is that adversary hits just as hard as him, has a decent amount of health, and he can combo you with him. As you can see, he's still attacking, and he will attack, and he won't just do that. He'll also use his turret as well. But he doesn't do this just once. He does this 3 times. Second time has 2 summons, which can combo even greater. Then he has another summon right here. And the thing is that they were almost onto something with the mimic. And if they change the mimic into where if you kill it, you get flask and health restored with that buff, I think that would have been fine, because the amount of damage that they can put out is just as much as him, and you can actually get comboed very, very easily with it. Matter of fact, I died with that God mode on. If a boss is doing as much damage as a full health bar of one of the tankier characters and is breaking through a thing that is supposed to make them invincible, I think that is something that needs to be changed, and damage values need to be adjusted, because as far as I tested, almost no other boss has that ability to. The only one that is kind of like that is the gaping jaw in its Everdark thing with like the lightning stuff, but even then it's like you have to just sit there and stay. This one I couldn't move out of because it was a combo. I didn't have enough poise. The lack of consistency with the bosses throughout the game, from field bosses to greater foes to night lords to Everdarks, is a problem because it eventually becomes very unfun to continue. For me, I don't feel fun playing against something that can one-shot me. I don't like fighting gimmicks like Augur's Everdark. I want something new. I want something experimental, and then bring me the tools to experiment with. Bring me more mechanics for the bosses while adding mechanics for me, the player. Don't just have me twiddle my thumbs of, well, I'm in a stun lock and I can't do anything. But that's enough talking about the fundamental flaws of the game, and there's a billion other things that I could criticize, but for me, these are the biggest parts that I think most people are going to talk about. Let's talk about Binding of Isaac then. Now, let's start here. Binding of Isaac is a decade old, so it has years under its belt. I remember when the creator, we're leaving that in, Edmund McMillan, didn't have white hairs on his beard. And what's odd is that a lot of mistakes that they did, Binding of Isaac did as well. Kind of lackluster variety, things getting nerfed, people complaining about that, so on and so forth. But it learned and it did more and more. Even with the more controversial ones of like Afterbirth Plus and nerfing things and taking away certain stuff and doing things, it still was leaps ahead of many roguelikes and still was very much enjoyable. But let's not go and just sing its praises. Let's actually go show everything that I criticized from Elden Ring and Binding of Isaac. So let's look at the item pulls though. So I just booted up a fresh run of Isaac and I recorded it. I got Headless Baby, and as you can see, it tells you right there. But just to go to show you, if I wanted to re-roll it, because your base character, Isaac, eventually gets upgraded to re-roll, you could re-roll it. Now, I didn't get anything good. All I did was get Depression, but basically did the exact same thing. And then I wanted to show just a little bit of the boss fight to show that even without that, my damage is still good. And then I got a boss room item, which gave me good stats. And then I finally wanted to show the last pool and the devil room, in which this is what I was talking about in risk reward, in which I got a laser around me and then just stats up and a little bit of health back. It also does give you a sick ass cosmetic, which I do like. Now, why did I show that? I wanted to show the differences between the pools. The treasure room pools is vast and can be kind of meh, but your boss pools always give you something relatively good. It may not be good every single time, but relatively good. Your devil, and it also has an angel if you skip this out completely, will have good items almost every single time. They can be mediocre, but they're mediocre good a lot of the time. But there's another thing with this that I didn't touch upon, and let me show you. So I just did another quick run and just booted up the game. And look, I found another Maw of the Void, and I found a Death Touch as well. So we have really good items, and we have this, which allows us to also go into angel rooms as well. So you can see that. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into the debug command, and I'm going to give myself infinite charges. And then I'm just going to go do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. And you notice how none of them are ever repeating. And then eventually you're able to force out this, a brimstone blood laser beam. But let's go and continue. Eventually, if you continue further and further, you will draw out the pool. So if you look now, none of these things seem satanic. And that's because I got rid of the pool. I drained the pool. And that's the thing that it did to solve kind of the redundancy of the game of giving you the same exact things over and over again. And having large pools is that once you see a certain item from the treasure room or the devil pool or the angel pool, it gets put as seen and you cannot be seen again under normal circumstances. There are other ways to do that though. And while you may not be able to do this in the special rooms like the Devil and Angel, you are able to do it in the Secret Room, which has some of the best pools in the game and is actually really tight. This means that you can get items like a R key, which allows you to restart your entire run, keeping all your items, but just putting you back to the beginning so that you can steamroll the game and get even more items. Or a thing called Rock Bottom, in which it prevents your stats from going down. And that's a little bit of simplification, but it just stops you from having any negative status effects on you. So the separation of pools and rewards and having this mechanic added, and by the way, it's kind of a recent mechanic, it allows you to go and become more powerful. And that's one of the things I think that Elden Ring kind of forgets is that a roguelike is also supposed to allow yourself to be really powerful sometimes, that you're supposed to steamroll bosses sometimes, that if a person is interacting with the mechanics to a very high skill degree, they should be able to do a lot of stuff. This on top of other mechanics, like if you miss a treasure room, you increase planetariums, which can have really good items, but you get extra room for treasures. And then you have things like a shop, which has a revolving stock. And sometimes you can actually get a restock machine by paying a little bit of extra money. This allows you to go and burn through those pools as well and get items that you may want. And just from this, you saw that Binding of Isaac solved the pool room problem. But let's go a little bit deeper and show how Binding of Isaac handles skill expression with knowledge of that pool and not just these pseudo tests. So this is what we call a reverse card. These are high risk, high reward things that allow more skilled players to do certain things. So with a reverse card like the stars, takes my first item that I ever picked up or whatever is in the queue. So the next would be polydactyl and gives me 2 items. And then I can do the same thing with rerolls, doing the same manipulation of the pool again. And depending on what room you use it in, like a devil, angel, treasure room, it will be connected to that pool. Once again, just adding on to the thing of manipulating pools and forcing out items that you want. So you can see where this succeeds a lot more, especially with rewarding skill players and rewarding players that do risk with rerolls, because you might get something worse or you might have missed out on a synergy. It rewards this knowledge. It rewards you spending time on stuff and doesn't put you on a clock and give you generic rewards like a weapon that does maybe 15 more damage. But let's move on to the bosses and see how Binding of Isaac handles its bosses. So over here, I just immediately teleported into a boss room using the debug command to give myself just a teleporting card and just fight it right away. And I'm going to fight bosses back to back with each other to go and kind of simulate Elden Ring Nightreign, in which you don't really have guaranteed items unless you fight bosses. I do take a devil deal, but that's just kind of a risk reward thing. I get a damage up from this, one of the best damage ups in the game. Also increases devil deal chance. And you can see here, once again teleported, and you can see that the bosses are relatively simple, but if you did not know how to fight them, you could end up getting hit and hurt badly. So that's that. I get a damage up again, and then I roll, and you can see I get flight and speed, which is pretty good, but it does put me at 1 HP, which is what I was talking about with risk reward. Then I fight this, which is a upgraded version of a boss, and it's actually pretty tricky because there are two of them. So there's still a level of challenge in this game compared to, you know, other roguelikes maybe, but even then there's many roguelikes that do this in champion version of bosses or enemies, and you can see I got hit there and I have to play somewhat careful now because of the risk reward that I took. But overall I was able to handle it, and you can see how this works because I had knowledge of this boss and I was able to move around and schmoove, was able to do it pretty well. So you can see that the bosses are relatively consistent even with the more difficult ones. And these are just the first beginning floor bosses. When you get into main story bosses, they have these really big flashy moves, but they are consistent with everything else in the game. They are dodgeable. Now some are harder to dodge than others, and some require a little bit more knowledge. But the thing is that it still works the same way throughout the entire game. Something to also point out that makes this extremely balanced is that all the bosses have the same amount of damage. Half a heart for normal damage, and then a full heart for special damage. So this may be touching the boss if they have a unique mechanic, like a stomp or something like that. Or past the womb, which is a certain depth, they start doing full hearts of damage. This means that a boss can do a really fast shooting move in which you might get hit multiple times, but instead of doing 12 hearts of damage, it only does 3 because Binding of Isaac also gives generous iframes. And Edmund knew this, so he added that. The Elden Ring Nightreign developers did not. They tried to force Souls-like mechanics into a roguelike, which does not work. Unlike a roguelike in which the bosses are going to be relatively big pushovers, even some of the endgame ones, Elden Ring Nightreign wants you to fail. Elden Ring Nightreign wants you to die just like a normal Souls-like. But a roguelike shouldn't be trying to make you fail for bosses. A roguelike shouldn't be trying to make things stupidly challenging. A roguelike shouldn't be trying to make you waste 40 minutes of your time just because they try to force in Souls-like mechanics, which is very, very different. Even Elden Ring and Sekiro knew not to waste the player's time with runbacks. This goes all the way for one of the first bosses that you can fight. Or the very last boss in the end game. And for all intents and purposes, we're going to say Elden Ring is the king of Souls-likes, which Elden Ring Nightreign does not listen to. So then you would go into roguelikes and see what it says. And Elden Ring Nightreign does not listen to that one either. So how does it not listen to anything that shows what design there needs to be? In Elden Ring, it's don't waste people's time with bosses. In Binding of Isaac, it's don't waste people's time with bosses. With Elden Ring, it's allow the player to choose their builds and allow them to be powerful enough to fight these bosses. And Binding of Isaac, it's allow the player to have a more knowledgeable approach to certain items and pools and things like that to allow them to get really strong so that they can steamroll bosses. Elden Ring Nightreign does not do anything similar at all to any roguelike I have ever seen or any Souls-like I have ever seen, and it fails in both regards. But let's move on from that. Let's talk about the characters in Binding of Isaac, just like I did for Nightreign. Well, unlike Elden Ring Nightreign, completing certain things with certain characters unlocks better stuff than just a map change with maybe some slightly different rewards. So before we go into the interaction with the characters, let's look at the characters themselves in terms of the title screen. The first thing that you're going to see is a little note. This determines your unlocks. Certain characters will have better unlocks than others. Certain ones are just there for the sake of it. This means that a character like this that I never play has more to do and gives more unlocks. They can be certain things like giving yourself an incubus, which doubles your damage because it gives you a familiar that copies you, or greed, which can give you things like greed gullet, which can give you health depending on how much money you have. This is very different than Elden Ring Nightreign, in which defeating a boss is just for the sake of claiming you defeated a boss. So this means that unlocks and defeating certain bosses actually have meaning. And not everything is amazing, but it doesn't have to be. Some things are just okay. Some things are middle of the road. Some things are, oh my god. Some things are, oh, that's dog water. But that's what keeps it interesting. And with the pull system, it allows this thing to experiment. It allows you to experiment. It allows it to be better than what it should be. But let's look at some characters, shall we? We have stuff like Kane, good speed, good damage, but the thing is that he has abysmal range. He also can only have good pills, and he has a paperclip to unlock all chests. You have stuff like Eve that has a dead bird as her starting item, or you can go and force hurt yourself, which allows you to get damage and speed with Curse of Babylon. But the downside of this is that you're always going to be low HP, and it only procs with low HP. Or you have Azazel, which has a very high speed, very high damage, and even the Brimstone laser, but it's just short. He's one of the toughest boys around, and he's just really, really powerful. Great synergies and everything. And every character is like this, where they have a unique thing innate to them. And while they can fit into archetypes, there's things that separate them and justify them being them. Unlike Elden Ring Nightreign, in which a lot of the characters do have a archetype, but there's a little bit too much overlap and there's not enough separation. This makes you want to play more and not just one character, as they're weirdly similar but strangely unique. And every item found that is innate to a certain character can be unlocked by that character and be found by other characters as well. So that razor blade that Eve has, you can find that later on once you unlock it. The D6, you can unlock that, other characters can find it randomly as well. And etc, etc, etc. And I can sing its praises all day long and compare it to Nightreign over and over again and say bad, bad, bad. But let's look at Elden Ring Nightreign in terms of its systems, and let's see if we can fix it or have more interaction with those. So the Knight system doesn't really make any sense. And something that I didn't mention before, you can get a curse on your world in which the Knight still goes, but you still have to continue it. Something like that doesn't really work that well. So instead, if there is curses, if there is a special events like Morgoth or stuff like that, the world pauses. On top of that, instead of the Knight damaging you, what it could be is that the Knight debuffs you or buffs enemy. And one last system that I would add to keep it kind of the same and kind of still a threat is that if you die in there, you completely lose that level. So you can never get that back. And everything next from it, you continuously lose more and more. Especially considering that there is only a limited amount of enemies on the map, this makes sense. I think this is one of the more fundamental changes and one that I want to see no matter what. The bosses and everything could be a bah humbug and everything else could be tossed into the wind of any reworks or anything. But with the Knight system, it does have to fundamentally change, especially if they are creating bosses that are going to be harder and harder, and especially bosses like Everdark Libra in which they can just one-shot you. I think that my change is a good compromise in which it keeps the threat of the Knight still there, but allows people to have greater skill expression and take their time if they want to. You know, if you want to, your team can go fight a gargoyle that got buffed from the Knight, but you gotta watch out, that thing might one-shot you. I think if we were to go with how my idea was with the Knight rework, this would also lead to the reworking of field bosses in general. Because I don't really feel good fighting something at like level 11 and almost dying to it in one hit. You know, fighting a Draconic Tree Sentinel that can hit me for 75% of my health with one attack and then just light attack me and take another third into where I die in a combo isn't really good either. I think if it doesn't touch either the bosses or the Knight system, then what it needs to do is that it needs to touch up on its roguelike elements. Because right now, what it feels like is that it's attacked on afterthought rather than being an innate design, which I think is bad if you're a Souls-like and a roguelike. With that, you can have different set of pools. So things like the ruins, instead of giving you weapons, give you buffs and resistances and stuff like that. The cathedral places give you weapons based off of what its affinity is. So it's always going to be a fire. And then they can add more like poison churches and stuff like that. Formidable foes maybe have a set of selected weapons based off of the foe you face. So facing against a gargoyle with a halberd and a straight sword will give you a great sword and a halberd rarity, and maybe a axe if it's the axe variant. And with the separation of these pools and the manipulation that you can do with it, this allows characters to specialize more and more. I think this also would allow them to buff the characters a lot more, especially if they're going to go and make bosses bigger, better, faster, and more damaging. So Raider doesn't have the same exact damage values as Wilder. He does, let's say, 20% more and effectively, let's say, 30% more DPS. So every time you complete something, you're not starting off at 0. Maybe if you defeat 3 bosses, you start out at 10% and 20%, and this allows you to get to 120% and allows bosses to then go 120%. And it makes things unique. So if you fight an Everjail, it's not the same thing as fighting a Ruin, it's something different. It has their own set of things. If they don't want to change any of that, then they would have to fundamentally change the Night Lords. Because as it stands, the Night Lords give challenge, but the challenge only extends so far as much as the balancing of the bosses, which is very little. A lot of them rely on very gimmicky things to go and try to create this challenge, but after you see through it and after you like get oohed and awed, eventually you start to see like, why is this annoying? Why is this not really the greatest one? And especially when there's a lack of mechanics added to the bosses, like Libra with his Everdark variant, it becomes a weird thing, and where I have to ask myself, why is it that they have these good bosses in which they do add mechanics? Like if you break Fulgur in his charging thing, you get a little bit of extra damage from that and you stop him from doing that, but then he becomes really aggressive at you. Versus if you don't do it, he gets a buff and he does stuff, but he doesn't become as aggressive. So it's kind of like a pick your poison, and it's balanced around that. Or Caligo, in which it has armor in its Everdark variant, but that armor can be broken and you can stagger them a little bit and you can get extra damage off. And that it also has this weird design that is beautiful, in which the closest space to the dragon is actually the safest. But then you have stuff like Everdark Libra, which it just combos you and it kills you even with God mode on. Having a mechanic where something is like a glass cannon where it doesn't have that much health, but it does a lot of damage to you would be a lot better. And what I think Libra could have been with its Everdark, or having something in which is a tank, but it does low amounts of damage, would be another type of boss that would be good. Experimenting with stuff like that instead of having the bosses do ludicrous amounts of damage every single time, meanwhile having basically 20 AoE options and 15 large attack options, is going to be a lot better for the game in the long run. But hey, these are just my thoughts on what could change and what could be better. I played it and I enjoyed it for the time being, but as time went on, especially with the Everdarks, I started to enjoy it less and less, as I found it challenging, but not in the right way. But like I said, these are just my thoughts and my opinions. If you like this, hit like, subscribe to see more. Bye bye.